what about a game like, I hate to bring it up, but Monopoly? Okay.
Right. Just throw it in
Sorry
the
about
trash.
this. Throw the whole thing in the trash. It's crit think time.
Ooh, critically thinking.
Yeah.
What if I fail?
Well, then you go to the corner. And you stay there.
I've got the corner right behind me.
So actually, you're already in the corner. So you've already... So, there's only up now. You can only go up. So I was thinking about another one of those philosophical discussions that we have a tendency to get into once in a while on a rare occasion.
Oh, like that one trolley problem.
Yeah, or the million trolley problems. The one about the lobsters. Anyway, this time, though, I wanted to take one you're probably familiar with called the Ship of Theseus.
I am familiar with the Ship of Theseus. For people who aren't familiar with the Ship of Theseus, however,
yes.
Did you want to give a brief rundown?
I can, or you can. Do you want to do rock, paper, scissors for it?
No, I'll let you go. You seem prepped for this already, so...
Okay, so basically the idea of the Ship of Theseus is, if you got the Ship of Theseus, and it was in a... Is it in the museum usually? I don't know. Anyway, you just have the Ship of Theseus. And you take a board, and you replace one of the boards of the Ship of Theseus with a new board, like you're repairing old boards. Eventually, there's going to be a point where there aren't that many original pieces, or possibly no original pieces, of the actual Ship of Theseus. And the question is, if we've replaced every single part by part, is it still the Ship of Theseus? If I've kept replacing it, does it still maintain what it was?
So here's the better version, I think, of this, is that if you've got the ship, for instance... In this case, the Ship of Theseus, any item like this. If you take and replace the parts, but you keep the old parts.
Okay.
So you take the boat and you replace a piece at a time until you've replaced the entire ship with new pieces.
Got it.
But you've kept the old pieces and put them back together over here.
Oh.
So which one of these two ships is actually the Ship of Theseus?
Got it.
Because now you've got the one that you originally took all the original pieces from and rebuilt it, and the ship that you've replaced all the pieces on, which is now basically a new ship.
Got it. Yeah, exactly. So you've essentially cloned a ship. You've made two ships of Theseus, but one of these, it has to be a real one. Okay, so those are two versions I think we're familiar with, either the actual replacing of them because they start to wear away, or the trading away to recreate it somewhere else. Like the thieves. Wasn't that the whole idea that the thieves are constantly stealing pieces by pieces to rebuild it somewhere else? The reason I bring it up is because I wanted to ask a question about that in terms of game design. Because a lot of the games, role-playing games that you might have seen, games in general, are built on a framework of something else before it. You take something and you say, hey, I'll take this and I'll bring it over here and then I'll modify it. I'll change it around. When does it stop being the thing that it was originally and it starts being the new thing that can be called something different?
Yeah.
That's the real question here. So, your initial thoughts. When do you think that process starts? For you, when is something a new entity?
For gaming, it's a little different than the actual, Ship of Theseus. Tabletop, for instance, you can take a whole system and transport it to a new version and just update it, but then it's not quite the same thing, because you're not just replacing parts of it with new parts, you're changing the parts, so they're not quite the same.
Right.
Video games, however, you can definitely update the systems to be more modern, to be more efficient, better at what they do. That might be a better example of it.
Okay.
Maybe it's when you take Hammer Editor version 1, for instance, for Valve stuff, and update it to the version 2 or something like that.
Right.
It's like, it's a more powerful engine, it's better, it's the same thing, but newer.
What about, for instance, like new Dead Space?
Haven't seen much about it, but apparently it's a good remake.
It apparently it is a really good remake in comparison to the original Dead Space, where what they did is they kind of kept the same layout of Dead Space, but they updated a lot of things. Like one, it looks better and everything, and they changed some of the game elements so that it was much more fluid and how you develop your character and everything like that. However, that one and the 2008 version are both called Dead Space. So now what we have are literally in very similar fashion to the ship of Theseus. We have two ships of Theseus known as Dead Space.
I would say similarly when they reboot games and you give us like DMC after we've already had Devil May Cry.
Right.
But I think that's just a naming convention at that point, because God of War, like the new one, is still named God of War, but it's not like a remaster of the old one.
It's a completely different game. They just started calling it that again. Exactly. We're putting new parts on something that was originally there, and it's still called the same thing. I guess the thing is, though, when we're talking about like a video game like Dead Space, the original game exists, the new game exists, we know that these are different entities, even though they are related to each other, and they can have object permanence together. They can both exist in the same realm. My big question, though, is if we take a system and we start tweaking it and start moving it around and everything, when does it stop being the original thing? For instance, here's one that maybe you could talk about with a little bit more expertise. D&D 3. Okay. Eventually we have D&D 3.5. It's still the basic system, but you've changed some things now.
Yeah.
That has led it from 3 to 3.5. So when does it become 3.5? When does it go from this thing to this thing?
Oh, that is when they print a new book.
Oh, so they just printed a new book altogether.
Yeah, because there's Player's Handbook 3.0, and they're like, we need to make some revisions for it, we're reprinting it. And this is 3.5. They modified some of the layout slightly, the book, fixed some things, and they had a better cover for it too. I think I had a 3rd edition rulebook at some point too.
But see, 3rd edition has all but been forgot. Like, no one talks about playing 3. If
we should do an episode about that sometime.
Yeah, that'd be
about why 3.5 and 3 are things that exist.
Yeah,
that'd be fun.
Yeah, that would be
do some research.
You move from different versions, 3 to 4 to 5, and you keep some of the original stuff in it, and it modifies over the course of time. So they rebrand it because you've put new things onto it. But as you kind of mentioned earlier before we started recording, what about if you had like a 3.5 and a Pathfinder? There are some differences, but...
Definitely. So the difference is it's not quite the ship of Theseus, because you're taking the whole ship, moving it over here, and then going like, we could use a few more sails and a few less masts.
Yeah.
Because Pathfinder changes some of the things how D&D approached it. They added their own flares. They took some stuff away that might have been confusing. I haven't played Pathfinder in a while, but they definitely took like the 3.5 SRD, the Standard Resource Document, and went, most of this is fine. We're going to add a bunch of new classes, some new races. We're going to change a couple of these functionality things that we want to be different. I know you've played a little bit of a Pathfinder Kingmaker, I think.
Yep, yeah.
Where it's got a couple of the things you probably weren't familiar with, like the command move bonus or something.
No.
And there's stuff like that. So it's definitely, they took the things they liked and kept them, and took things they didn't like and changed them or replaced them.
What about a game like, I hate to bring it up, but Monopoly? Okay.
Right. Just throw it in the trash.
Just throw the whole thing in the trash. There's about 700 versions of Monopoly. They all remain Monopoly. When does a game that takes that framework stop being Monopoly anymore?
Well, usually the games that take the framework of Monopoly just rebrand it as like a different thing. Or it's one of the
Sure.
17,000 different Monopoly titles that are just Monopoly with a different, like, brand.
Right.
You know,
right.
like, My Little Pony Monopoly, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
Or like specific towns that have their own version of the game because they're like, oh, it's the tourist version. Great, who wants this? Nobody wants this. Stop printing it.
The trap card that I would have thrown in here at this point is that technically, Monopoly wasn't actually Monopoly to begin with. This is actually kind of a good analogy for the ship of Theseus. Maybe they should have called it the ship of Monopoly. But once upon a time, there was a game called the Landlord's Game. And it was the game that came before it was actually, like, published. And the game was basically the same, except the intention was completely different. The intention behind it was completely different. Originally, when the lady who created the Landlord game created that, it was the idea of an anti-landlord game.
Right.
That was trying to show the problems with landlords and was attempting to get people to understand how they should work together to try and make the system work. And then that, with the same basic framework, ended up being sold as Monopoly, where you have to screw over your friends as quickly as possible so you can accrue massive wealth.
The problem is capitalism.
Monopoly is... The story behind Monopoly is also a great story about capitalism. Oh my god! They should make a movie about Monopoly, and that could be the documentary like we were talking about before.
They can make Mr. Moneybags actually with the moneybags in a monocle.
The monocle, the moneybags, the whole thing. It would be amazing. Who would we get to play that? I don't know. Russell Crowe, he can do anything. Do you think that there is an actual analogy that we could make between the ship of Theseus and the evolution of game design?
Maybe somewhere in there. Part of it.
Part of it, yeah.
Not sure what the analogy would be.
I guess, do you crib in games entirely from the original format? Which you shouldn't do. But I guess that does kind of bring you back to the basic question, though, is the ship of Theseus itself, right? Yeah. Like we've traded all the parts out from the ship of Theseus, and now there's another ship of Theseus. So if we're saying that, you can't really just like wholesale rebrand a game and have two versions of the game, then theoretically that also means that the ship of Theseus you can't do that with in the first place. So which one is the actual ship?
I think smarter people than us have tried to answer this question and not done so well. So
you know what I'm gonna say? I'm gonna say that it's the difference between like Coke and New Coke.
It's the amount of Coke you're getting for your dollar.
Absolutely. How much can you snort and how quickly? But no, also the idea of like the ship that we've traded all the parts out for is the original Coke Classic, and then the new ship with all the new things is New Coke, and they're basically the same thing. To the outside observer, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell, but if you really got a close-up look, you'd be like, something's different between these two things.
I thought it was the ingredients, but that's fine.
It might have been the ingredients too. But then again, the ingredients in the ships of Theseus are also technically different, even though they look the same.
Yeah.
So there you go. The better analogy to the ship of Theseus has nothing to do with games. It had to do with Coca-Cola the entire time. We talk about all sorts of topics here. Anywho, this is a crit think. We usually pass a question along to everybody else. Should there be a ship of Theseus game?
Yes.
Great. You let us know in the comments down below. Bet you didn't think that was going to be the question, but here we are.